Welcome to Happy Planet, an impact economy podcast where we speak with entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders in search of profit and planetary health. I'm your host, Abigail Carroll. Our first season is about the ocean economy, a world I'm intimately familiar with, and where some of the greatest environmental impacts are being forged from business innovation. Today I'm speaking with Blaine Grimes. She's the president of Gulf of Maine Ventures and chief venture officer of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, also known as GMRI. GMRI is an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to the resilience of the Gulf of Maine ecosystem and the communities that depend on it. Despite its local focus, GMRI's research projects are far from small scale. The problems facing the Gulf of Maine have global relevance. And Gulf of Maine Ventures, the investment arm Blaine heads up, helps propel these research projects into action. Blaine has terrific insight into the gap between innovative blue economy businesses and the capital, technical knowledge, and networks needed to help them grow. Welcome to the podcast, Blaine.
Hi, Abigail. It's great to be here.
I am really excited about what you're doing in this whole blue economy space, and I'd like to learn more about it. You've been working for Gulf of Maine Research Institute for some 14 years, I think. Tell me about that and how you decided to create a venture fund for the Institute.
It's actually 18 years.
Oh, wow.
It's been a long time. Yeah, I know. I've been with the GMRI for a very long time. And for the majority of my time at GMRI, I was the head of the development. So that's fundraising, communications, and marketing division. So I've been at GMRI since we were very small, and we're approaching 90 people now.
Wow.
So I've been there for a wonderful period of growth and expansion of our mission. The reason I'm doing this is because there was an opportunity that I think we all saw with a gap of entrepreneurs in the blue economy who are getting stuck. We often run into them in part of our stakeholder work, and there was really no unified path or a community for them to support their collective efforts. So we had businesses that were slow to grow and opportunities where we saw ways to expand in our impact and our mission if we could provide a path for them. So the idea began to germinate even almost a decade ago.
Oh,
it's
wow.
the best job I've ever had. And I didn't really know when I started poking at it 10 years ago, thinking about it, how to make it happen. And we're inventing it literally on the fly. Like we're completely trying to figure it out on the fly. And it's only happening because of this magic of other people believing.
That's amazing.
You know, it's been really personal. People decide to help you and you can't figure out why.
Right.
I mean, it's an institution, but it's not really. It's an institution, but it's also some individual people that you bring along and that decide to help for whatever reason.
Yeah, and I always feel like there's sort of pushing something into the universe and then the universe is pulling you forward. And I felt that, I launched a couple different product lines, what through the farm, and I felt that difference. There were some things that I launched that I couldn't make the opportunity or the product fast enough. And then we had another line that just wasn't a perfect market fit. And it was always just this push. And so I've learned to know the difference between being pulled into the universe and feeling like you're having to push. And I think that's the difference between being on the right path and not quite being there. And it sounds like you're being pulled into the universe.
Well, I don't know. You can find, sometimes it feels like that, and other days you're like beating your head. But it is, if you find flow and then you just go, wait, that's so crazy. People are calling me for reasons I didn't expect, and it makes flow for flow. So yeah, I think, and then there's the just believing. You just have to believe that it's the right thing, that you hear and not get enough feedback, and you just have to keep going.
Well, just because you're being pulled into the universe doesn't mean that it's not hard work and like head banging work. Right.
Sure.
You've got this idea, Jeremy, you see this gap, and it's a big step between seeing a problem and taking those first steps to fix it and deciding that, you're the one to move forward and make that happen. How do you go from this idea to starting a fund? Because in the end of the day, we look at investors and we think of them as sort of this static group with the money and everything. But in fact, these funds, they are startups too. They've got their own missions and they've got to find market product fit.
I mean, let's start with mission. Why do we do something like this? So the mission of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute is to pioneer collaborative solutions to global ocean challenges. And obviously, as you're mentioning, one of those challenges is building and supporting a 21st century marine economy. And so GMRI has a lot of programs that are focused on the marine economy and its stakeholders, but the thought was that we could do more. And my program, which is called Gulf of Maine Ventures, is focused on supporting market-based solutions to those ocean-based challenges. So our thought is that GMRI was a logical institution to bridge, in effect, this knowledge that we have, our extensive network of regional partners and advisors, and bridge between our staff, our stakeholders, industry, and the people who are out there as founders and investors who are trying to innovate in the marine economy. So that was the concept to begin with.
So you saw yourself almost like an aggregator of these different forces in this economy, these different people and players.
Right. So we didn't start with the idea of a fund. And I think it's important maybe for your listeners to understand that we really have three areas that we work in, and the fund is just a part of it. We have a sort of three-pronged strategy that has evolved really out of our understanding of the market space. So the first thing we do is an area called create. The second is called scale. And then the third, which is what you're referring to, the fund, is what we call invest. I'm happy to explain a little bit about each of those if that makes sense.
Sure.
So create is the place where we help commercialize ideas that either we've generated internally, because as a large group of people, we have a very entrepreneurial staff. And sometimes there's something that doesn't fit naturally within the philanthropic or nonprofit space, but really wants to be a for-profit, market-driven concept. So we commercialize internally generated ideas. We also develop ideas with entrepreneurs or founders or organizations that are external to us with partners. And then we combine our internal market insights and external market insights to identify business opportunities. So it's really ideation. And we do a lot of that work with partners like See Ahead in Boston, or partners like the University of Maine and Bigelow, Rue Institute, and others. That's the create phase.
Yep.
Scale, which is the second part of our work, is where we support businesses that already are kind of in process and beginning to grow, but they need access to industry knowledge, or they may need technical advisors, or they might need industry insights or connections. And we have a really interesting and diverse network of partnerships and resources. And so we kind of triage like that. We are like that train station. We kind of help partner people and make sure that they have the resources they need.
Yep.
And then the last piece is invest. And that is a partnership right now. And that partnership is managed with an entity called Bold Ocean Venture Fund. And we're partnering with them on a $15 million mission-driven seed and early stage venture capital fund to actually put money into startups to help them reach their maximum impact and financial returns.
I would like to just understand, just from the investment perspective, a little bit more about your fund. Are you raising money now? Can people invest? How does that work?
We are currently raising capital right now. We are currently talking to potential limited partners for the Bold Ocean Venture Fund. And so if someone was interested in learning more, they would contact me or our partners at Bold Ocean Ventures. So we are in the early stages of raising a $15 million, I guess I would call it a micro fund, which is the beginning of what we hope will be a series of funds that we will raise over time. So this would be our prototype or test fund to kind of demonstrate the potential. And you look to probably invest in 8 to 10 companies over the next couple of years. So we hope to close the fund late this year, early next year.
I feel like we've seen this model developing in other segments, like the Flagship Group down in Boston, and these sort of research institutes in different segments that are spinning off or supporting investments. And I think that you're pretty early on into this model, especially in the sort of marine technology industry. Is there any sort of growing body of research or data that shows that this model has a greater impact or has, better success rates with their companies than just sort of startups that are created in a garage somewhere?
I would tell you, I don't know if there's a body of research that says that. We're hearing from the entrepreneurs and founders that we work with, as well as some of the early investment and family investors and family offices we're talking to, that they see this as a really compelling and sort of forward-looking model. So On the founder side, especially in the marine space that we're in, we often hear from people, wow, this is the first investment group that we've talked to that actually understands and can talk our market space. Just yesterday, we were talking to someone who said, I didn't know anyone that could actually say the word OOS, which means Ocean Observing System, or understands quota systems on the wild fishery side, or has climate understanding or seafood supply chain. That theory of a bridge, I think, is real. There really is a lot of capital interested in this market space, but they don't have the content expertise. So I don't know that I can say I know about other models that have proven that this is more effective, but I can say anecdotally, we're hearing a lot of support for this and thought that this can work. We do know that there are nonprofits like GMRI that have, in fact, created investment arms. What we think is unusual about ours is that we're not doing it the investment side ourselves. We really are choosing to partner with experts who we think will provide more expertise and more capacity to make good investments and good decisions. And we're working really jointly as a 50-50 partner with them. So we think that's a really interesting, complex, but interesting model.
To borrow from Hillary Clinton, it takes a village to create a company.
Yeah, and they've given a lot. Let me tell you, this has not been an easy exercise to think through.
Yeah.
And then there's been a lot of give and take on both sides to learn about each other culturally and to really think about teaching each other the market space that we don't know, that we're less familiar with.
Tell me a little bit about the role Maine plays in all of this. I mean, it seems like Maine's on fire right now, and I think you're both part of that, and you are also maybe benefiting from that.
It's really interesting. On the one hand, a lot of people don't think of Maine as a place that has a seat at the table in any particular area nationally or internationally. And what I would say is that this is a space, the 21st century marine economy is a space where Maine is in a very unusual competitive position. And it's something I think we identified at GMRI years ago. It's part of, I think, why we've been successful and been growing. The Gulf of Maine, we have this incredibly rich heritage, which we all know. Our marine heritage is deep. We have production and processing infrastructure. We have really rich technology hubs and regional research institutions that have just unbelievable depth of skill. And we have this very diverse mix of industry. So if you look around the country and you think about the sort of hubs where marine activity happens, we're one of the most diverse. So we not only have still a vibrant wild fishery, but we also have this amazing emerging and diverse aquaculture industry. We still have a really interesting position on the table with offshore wind. There's just energy around a mix of activities that have to do with the marine economy. So it's the mix kind of our heritage and then this innovation and sort of this opportunity that makes Gulf of Maine really interesting. I have to say the other part is that the Gulf of Maine itself is a living laboratory. And a lot of people have heard the stats that was actually out of research that came from GMRI that our Gulf of Maine ocean body is warming faster than 90% of the world's oceans. And that makes us, on the one hand, kind of the canary in the coal mine. We see change happening really rapidly here, which means we're innovating. We have an imperative to innovate. And so between our history and the mix of activity that's happening and the intellectual capital that's here, and then this really compelling, urgent need to innovate, I think that's why Maine has such an unusual seat at the table.
So you've mentioned a couple of times the 21st century marine economy. What does that mean and what does that look like?
For us, what we're focused on is really think about the intersection between the seafood supply chain and climate change. That's the space that GMRI has knowledge and expertise. And so if you think of the blue economy as a really vast space, and there's lots of different categories that one could explore if you're talking about the blue economy. And I think it gets confusing. We're really interested in ocean climate, so the climate change issues and the implications of those, aquaculture, ocean data, and the seafood supply chain. I'm happy to elaborate on any of those because there's lots of innovation within each of those four sectors that we think are interesting and likely to be compelling investment opportunities or where we're going to see a lot of innovation over the next decade.
This podcast is really interested in sort of the impact that these businesses can make. Maybe I'd be interested in hearing about where the nexus between profitability and impact is in these sort of different segments with the ocean climate and aquaculture and data and supply chain. I mean, how are these segments really providing opportunities to investors and to the planet?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're talking to someone who's been working at, a marine research institution for the last, 18 years. So this is a mission-based initiative. It's all about impact. We know that we have a seafood supply deficit and that's shifting. We know that our wild fisheries really are struggling to keep pace with international competition. And so there's a lot of need for innovation, renovation, adaptation to the changes that are coming at us. The way we think about this work is sort of a triple bottom line. Everything we're doing is not just considering the market forces, but it's also sort of mission impact. So our expectation is that we're going to do good by investing in companies that are going to make the planet better by protecting and supporting healthy ecosystems. So companies that have that at the center of their activity, that make the seafood supply chain more sustainable than it is today. We're all obviously cognizant of the fact that we have global pressure for additional protein, and we need to think hard about how the ocean is a resource for that and how we can pursue it sustainably, either on the wild fishery side or through growing aquaculture responsibly. We need a strong working waterfront to support any jobs on the water in the ocean. We need to have infrastructure that can survive and adapt to rising sea levels and changing water conditions. And we need to think about how to equip our communities to deal with those changes and to continue to preserve that way of life that we've had for so many years. And in Maine, that's really important because we have really diverse communities up and down the coast along the water. Ultimately, we want resilient communities. That's how these things fit in. So we believe that you can't focus on any one of those. And we need to understand and effectively provide protein for a growing population. We need to figure that out. And we need to do it in a way that doesn't compromise our sustainability as a species, right?
For sure. And talk to me a little bit about aquaculture. I obviously was in the aquaculture industry. I was in the bivalve world, which is generally a fairly positive thing for people to get excited about. Finfish aquaculture gets a bit of a bum rap. And is that merited? And, what are some of the misconceptions about aquaculture, either generally or specifically about finfish, that we could maybe address today? Because I think it's a really important contributor to this creating proteins that use little, don't use water, that are easy on the planet, but it continues to go under a lot of scrutiny and get a lot of pushback from the public.
I want to say, first of all, that I certainly recognize, and we recognize, it's a really complicated issue because we have traditional industries. And the complication is that everybody needs a seat at the table to think about the possibilities for how to have multiple uses of the ocean resources that we have. And I think one of the challenges is, how do you pursue something like finfish aquaculture in the ocean in a way that is less impactful or can sort of get along with other existing uses? I think people perceive this in a way. The majority of finfish, actually only finfish ocean aquaculture we have in Maine, is salmon at this time. And it's all the leases are held by one company, which is a Canadian company called Cook. And they run a really tight ship. They really do work in their communities, and they are very careful about how their row out and their systems are impacting the local economy. I think people are worried naturally about precedents and view sheds, and it's really about getting along. I think that's the biggest issue right now. I think there's been a lot more, my sense is there's been a lot more acceptance of the actual product and the way that the product is grown. Those systems have come a long way since the 80s when it got a bad rap. And there's a lot of care taken in not only containment of those fish, but also how they're fed and lack of impact, or reducing the impact on the natural environment in terms of treatments and just basically the care that's taken. And I am not an expert on how aquaculture is pursued offshore, but I do think that there are a lot of misconceptions, and we need to be a little more tolerant as we think about the multiple uses of a public resource.
For sure. I mean, I remember applying for leases for my oyster farm, and you go under a lot of scrutiny. You have to make a big application to the Department of Marine Resources, and then there's public hearings. And what I sort of found was the public was very concerned, but then once you established the farm and you started creating food, your community became your biggest champion. So it becomes a source of great pride.
Yeah, it can be. I think there's really good examples of companies that have established themselves and been really good neighbors and been very deliberate about communicating with the community with which they're going to be embedded. And other examples that we've seen of companies with a lot more, let's say, hubris coming in and maybe just not being as attentive to their location or the existing, abutters, and haven't been as attentive to kind of the culture of bringing something new in. I mean, these can be wonderful jobs and opportunities to grow and support local communities. And some communities have been really attentive to allowing that to happen based on the approach that the individual leaseholders or lease pursuers have taken. So, I think there's great examples of good stewardship on both sides. And I guess I would encourage continued dialogue. And we do have to be attentive to the precedents that are being set in every case. And I'd say you're right, DMR is very rigorous. Some people complain about pace, but the process to get a lease is not a small one. And there's a lot of work that every person and everyone in aquaculture goes through to get permitted.
Right. It's a great way of siphoning off people. It's enough work so that, it's dissuasive. So only the truly motivated.
That's right. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. No.
Yeah, for sure. So I've heard a little bit about some, wild fishery people starting to get into like seaweed aquaculture and, for some of the main seaweed companies. And is that a good way to kind of start to bridge this gap if we've got people doing both aquaculture and wild catch?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm hearing and seeing the same thing. We are hearing that. I mean, there are several companies, one in particular that's gotten a lot of notice is the Atlantic Sea Farms run by Bree Warner. And that company has done a really amazing job of enlisting the farm. The farmers their farmers, I believe, are primarily almost exclusively lobstermen. One of the really cool things about seaweed aquaculture is seaweed grows an alternate cycle from if you're lobstering, when you would typically be lobstering. So folks who are already familiar with a particular area and they already have their buoy set up are really logical participants in the fishery. They can actually set up an area and get seed from some of these companies and grow out. I think the biggest challenge and one caution would be, and that I'm sure that folks who are in the seaweed production and buying side would be, make sure before you go out and start a farm where you're going to sell your product. We're still working. The royal we are still working on figuring out enough markets for value-added product. But it's a great opportunity to diversify potentially for fishermen who are looking to have additional income over the winter. So seaweed, I think the seed is put in, in October, November timeframe, and it's harvested right around March, April. So it really does fit in an alternate season. That's, again, one of those not for the faint of heart. Winter work is not easy. But, it's a great opportunity, I think, for some farmers. And we're seeing a lot of fishermen and particularly lobstering families get into it.
I think it's just a great way of sort of culturally sort of erasing this big divide, this perception that there's a big divide between the aquaculture community and the fishing community and sort of bridging that gap. We'll be right back after a short break. For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark Number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn. Blue Trace offers the easiest and most powerful traceability solution for shellfish harvesters, growers, distributors, and dealers. Their tagging and distributor apps enable organizations big and small to optimize their activities, comply with regulations, and keep up with their inventory. For more information, visit their website, blue-trace.com. Welcome back to Happy Planet. Talk to me a little bit more about this seaweed opportunity in Maine. I mean, we've got this wonderful crop. It grows off season when, leases aren't as conflictual with, other uses. We've talked about a little bit about seaweed as a food source, but there's a lot of other applications going on in the seaweed world. Are you all involved in any of that? Are you getting excited about some of that, like seaweed plastics or biotech or?
Yeah, I mean, I think a really interesting field that's growing and coming, and hopefully we'll see more of that in Maine. Right now, the majority of the seaweed that's harvested in Maine is harvested by one company, and that company is using that to produce food for people or food products with a few other side businesses, but its majority is food consumption. And so, on the one hand, we certainly would like to see Americans eat more products that have seaweed in them, whether it's all seaweed or just introducing it like in, smoothies as thickening cubes or in sprinkles or in spaghetti sauce. One of the companies we work with is making, sauces that have it embedded in it. So there's lots of opportunities for seaweed to be introduced in the food. But beyond that, there's a whole nutraceuticals industry. I think most people know that carrageenan, which is a product that comes from seaweed, that's in a lot of things that we already use, like toothpaste. So there are many, many varieties. I don't think I even know how many hundred varieties of seaweed there are. They're not all natural and native to Maine. But one of the things that we're excited about is seeing more types of aquacultured seaweed grown in Maine to give us more opportunities for diverse products. So we can imagine the biopharmaceutical industry in Boston could be interested in product evolution. Our friends and neighbors in Iceland are using seaweed in all kinds of things that are derivatives. So breaking down the seaweed from the frond to the stipe, which is the stem, and all of its base components provides for a wide variety of product opportunities. And so we're hoping that we'll see companies that know more about that capacity. There's a lot of that capacity right now, especially in Northern Europe, and we're hoping to see some of that expertise evolve and come to Maine, and then partner with our existing research institutions like Bigelow Labs, which has a lot of expertise in this area, or the University of Maine, which has some really interesting nanocellulose capacity. So we see it and we're really excited about it, and I think it's just a matter of time.
I'm really excited that you mentioned Iceland because they really have been a model of total use for seafood and innovation and packaging. And we have the Ocean Clusters Group here in Maine. And how are you all interacting with them? How are you looking to Iceland and their growing role in the Maine economy? And how are you looking to involve them or relate to them?
We are really excited about our friends at New England Ocean Cluster who have the HOOS, which is the Ocean Cluster, and they really serve as an entry point for a lot of really early stage entrepreneurs, people who are at that ideation or create stage. They create a community of practice, and they have a lot of events, and they have obviously a very tight connection to their kind of mother company, if you will, the model that they were built over, which is the Icelandic Ocean Cluster. We interact with them intermittently. They'll send entrepreneurs our way who might need business development assistance or who might need and are maybe ready for a little bit more support in terms of their planning, product development, or technical resources, because we do have that research capacity at GMRI, and we have a more extended network in that regard. Reciprocally, we've had a number of people come who said, we'd love to locate in Maine, but we don't have a place to sit, or I want to be part of a community. And so we've sent several folks their way to get desks or hot seats, if you will, to meet with other people where they can get, a community of support. And it's a really nice reciprocity that we have with them. We expect that we'll continue to see that grow. They're doing a great job. It takes a village, as you already said. So we want everyone to be talking about this as an opportunity for Maine, and everyone has a seat at the table.
It's really funny because I have this sense that, well, businesses aren't created in a vacuum. We think of this lonely entrepreneur that's out there, David and Goliath and conquering the world. But communities really build these companies, and the world has to allow you and want you to succeed. It's a really interesting dynamic. Before people come to you, what are some of the opportunities that Maine offers before you maybe go to someone like GMRI Ventures or Bold Ocean Ventures? There are other sources of funding that are available to people to get through sort of some of these early stages of development. Can you talk about that a little bit?
One of the things that's really unusual, I think very exciting about Maine, and we're beginning to be recognized nationally, is we have a very robust entrepreneurship community in Maine. I mean, really, really strong. And I guess I would cite at the very early stages, people could talk to folks at Coastal Enterprises, they help with early business development. Maine Center for Entrepreneurs, which I mentioned before, is excellent at early stage company development. They have a lot of programs and materials online that help companies. SCORE, which is a long established national program. I think we have had for many years one of the leading SCORE programs, which is a network of retirees primarily who can help if you have an idea and you just want to get started. I will say that we don't turn anybody away. If someone calls us and is curious or what to do, we will direct them to the right. We'll say, like, you're not ready for us yet, but here's a place you can start. Maine Technology Institute gives early stage seed grants. The Small Business Administration, there's these programs that MTI helps support companies apply for called SBIR, which are, I can't remember the acronym, but it's basically an innovation fund that helps you if you're a really early stage and you might need the ability to build a prototype or get to the next stage. There's a fair amount of grant writing involved, but this is really good money. FAME is another place for loans. Finance Authority of Maine. Maine Angels is also a really important early stage investment vehicle, and probably over 100 or more of investors who are interested in many different market spaces. And there's a subgroup of folks who are particularly interested in the blue economy. There are a lot of places that will help you. And I don't think there's anybody that has ever said Maine's stingy that way. I think, in fact, we're advantaged by having a small number of people and a large number of institutions that help with entrepreneurship.
So what are some of the trends that you're seeing in this blue economy, and what are you really excited about right now?
What's really interesting is, I think you said, we're kind of at the very early stage. This is a very nascent industry. If you talk to anybody who's in aquaculture in Maine, we're still really small. We're still really just beginning. We're at the very beginning stages. So the areas that we're interested in with Gulf of Maine Ventures and Bold Ocean Venture Fund are the service industries that are coming behind primary production. So we have people out there on the wild fisheries side still harvesting, and we have people who are beginning to grow product both in the ocean, and also we have interesting emerging and new systems on land, which are called recirculating aquaculture systems that are being built out. That provides an opportunity or a base for the evolution of service industries. So once a company gets big enough, then it maybe needs some help with managing inventory or traceability or data information to help figure out how to site a farm, or improvements in gear or alternative feed or general kind of fintech, financial management. So as this industry begins to evolve, not just in Maine or in the US, but globally, we're seeing a growth. And I think I heard our friend Sebastian Bell, the president of the Maine Aquaculture Association, he shared a data point a few years ago that the service industry for aquaculture specifically was growing much more rapidly than primary production anymore. And the data point I remember him saying was growing at around the rate of 14%. And that's a few years old. So it could be faster than that. So that's the areas we're interested in, is the evolution of that. And you can't be too early because then there isn't enough opportunity, right? A small company can't afford to buy a big system. But we're definitely seeing places where companies that have innovation can provide opportunities for the existing primary production companies or distributors or retail, if you think about the full seafood supply chain.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense, because these businesses are starting to get more sophisticated. I saw that as an oyster farmer, even people coming and trying to create solutions for us that would help us better manage our farms. And actually there are a couple of those now. And that just helps the whole economy grow, because in the end, you really need the tech support. You need those services to run better.
One of the things I noticed, or that everyone notices, is aquaculture farming is very labor intensive. And if a goal of ours collectively is to make farmers more, give them a higher level of profitability, then it behooves us all to look for innovations, either in terms of siting that would make products grow faster, or the way we handle and flip cages, or the way we grow, or the way we have more viable seed or any of those things that could cause a farmer to have a higher profit margin that makes those production farms more profitable, which then kind of supports the whole. So this is a building from the bottom kind of initiative, and everybody's needs matter.
Right. What in your mind makes a great entrepreneur? What are those qualities that you guys look for?
I was thinking about this last night before we were going to have this conversation, because on the one hand, I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, and in a weird way, I feel like an entrepreneur myself, because I certainly feel like we're creating something that hasn't existed. But I guess what I would say is, first of all, acknowledge that being an entrepreneurship is really hard. It is a really hard and lonely road, despite all these people that want to help you. So it takes a different kind of a sustained energy that comes from within, and a commitment to an idea, different than any other kind of work I've seen. So people who it requires deep passion and commitment to an idea, despite what anybody else might say to you. And persistence is a huge part of it. But one of the interesting dichotomies is the best entrepreneurs not only have this intense persistence, but they also have the ability to listen and to bring advisors around them and to really reshape or shift or pivot. So they're on the one hand rigid and persistent, and on the other hand, they're flexible. So I was thinking about what a funny combination that is last night, because it's really not all about just stick with it. It's also the best people really recognize when their idea isn't hitting and they need to change their idea to fit a customer's needs. And those are the people that actually succeed. And then, you have to be able to manage your numbers. You have to actually be serious about cash, which is the most important thing for any entrepreneur, is having enough money to keep going. So I think those are the little things. And then just deeply believing in your idea.
Is the team versus the product, what's more important?
For me, it's the team. I look for a strong team. A single entrepreneur with a great product, I think, is less likely to succeed than an entrepreneur that knows how to build a complementary team. So if you know what you're good at and you know what you're not good at, if you're self-aware, then you would build a couple more people. You'd have a co-founder or two. That's a really strong signal when you're ready for investment. Maybe in the early days, it's too early, but I think it can be hubris to think you can do it all yourself and that you have the idea and you don't want anybody else to take part in it. Great products are a dime a dozen. Great teams are hard to find.
I would completely agree with that. It's all about execution. And I think today's economy is really different too than an economy like 50 years ago. Today's economy is much more collaborative. And it gets back to this idea that your community is part of your success. And I think you need part of that is just getting the right people on board. Blaine, thank you so much for joining the program today and for being a visionary and pioneer in the fast-emerging blue tech investment space. Gulf of Maine Ventures is one of the early ocean-themed funds, a space that is becoming quite fashionable. By aligning themselves with a research institute, they are also pioneering another growing space, which seeks to close the gap between research and investment. I look forward to circling back with Blaine in a future podcast to hear about their progress. Thank you for listening. Please follow the Happy Planet podcast wherever you listen and leave us a rating and review. It really does help new listeners discover the show. Happy Planet was reported and hosted by me, Abigail Carroll. I am the executive producer. The talented Dylan Hoyer is our producer and editor. Our theme music was created by composer George Brandel Egloff. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetcapital.com.